Welcome back to the deep dive. You asked for it, you gave us the sources, and honestly, the mandate was clear. The full story, the exhaustive analytical breakdown of how the old world died.
Yeah, the 8-hour flight version, right? No skipping the ugly details.
Exactly. We're not jumping ahead. This is part one, the prelude. How did it all fall apart before the bombs?
And that prelude, well, it wasn't short. We're talking 26 years of things just grinding down. Our job today really is to cut through all the propaganda, all the noise, and expose that rotten core of the pre-war world.
The cynical politics, the resource grabs.
Oh yeah, decades of it. Geopolitical maneuvering, hoarding, and let's be blunt, absolute corporate malice. These things didn't just cause the collapse, they basically guaranteed it.
So we're laser focused today on everything leading up to that final terrible moment, that, what was it, 2-hour window?
Just 2 hours, Saturday, October 23rd, 2077, a global thermonuclear exchange. The end result, we know it. Total societal collapse.
Every major nation state gone, billions dead, the environment just scorched. Honestly, it's staggering how fast the final act played out.
It was fast. But, and this is the key, it was also inevitable. The world didn't just, stumble into nuclear war by accident.
Yeah.
They spent nearly 3 decades sprinting towards it. Mutually assured destruction wasn't a deterrent anymore. It felt like the destination. The Great War, that was just the explosive finale to the slow burn.
Resource sword.
Exactly. That whole period just proved, didn't it?
Right.
Once the essential stuff runs out, global diplomacy just evaporates instantly. And ethics, forget about it, they follow right after.
So the analogy holds then. The world didn't fall off a cliff.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They built a massive concrete wall, saw it coming for miles, and then just slammed the accelerator down right before impact. It was suicide by policy.
We need to understand the failures, the structure that made hitting that wall unavoidable.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this whole goddamn mess.
Right, got to start at the beginning. The root cause. Everything terrible flows from this energy starvation.
Mm-hmm.
By 2050, maybe even earlier, global fossil fuels, especially oil, petroleum,
Yeah.
they were running critically low. This wasn't just an economic dip. This was like a civilizational death sentence looming.
And we really need to stop and grasp why it hit them so hard, so fast. Their technology, it was an energy black hole.
Right.
Because they never really cracked advanced miniaturization, efficient manufacturing, scalable cold fusion, the things we almost take for granted now. Their entire infrastructure was enormous, clunky.
Incredibly energy hungry.
Exactly. It created this vicious feedback loop. They had these massive energy demands for terribly inefficient machines.
But the scarcity itself meant they couldn't fund the huge research projects needed to find a way out.
Precisely. It's like, imagine trying to run an old room-sized supercomputer on, I don't know, a handful of AA batteries.
Yeah, impossible.
It just demands more and more fuel until the tank is bone dry. And once those supplies started tightening globally, the political fragmentation, it kicked off immediately.
And the U.S., well, they didn't hesitate, did they?
Yeah.
Jumped straight into aggressive imperialism.
Zero hesitation.
2051.
Wow.
The United States just decides, to hell with diplomacy, invades Mexico. And the reason wasn't subtle.
Not at all. Sole purpose, stated openly.
Yeah.
Seize the remaining oil fields down south. Control the taps.
That single act, that unilateral aggression,
Yeah.
it basically set the tone for the whole damn era, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It was a signal flare to every other nation. Your resources are only yours if you can physically defend them. It opened the floodgates for, well, desperate greed on a global scale.
And it wasn't long before others followed suit. Europe, the European Commonwealth, they're watching this.
Watching the U.S. grab Mexican oil, watching Middle Eastern prices go through the roof.
And they decided, okay, if the Americans can just take what they need, why can't we? So 2052, off they go. Military action in the Middle East.
A catastrophic domino effect, just pure desperation driving policy. And the most terrifying consequence, it arrived almost immediately.
December 2053. Tel Aviv.
Yeah. The sources confirm it. A nuclear detonation wiped the city out, whether it was, a limited tactical strike between nations or some kind of terrorist act. The details are murky, but the result isn't.
WMDs. Used for the first time since Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
That fragile post-World War II taboo shattered, just like that.
Can you even imagine the psychological shockwave? For over a century, that line, that one single line, it had held once Tel Aviv was hit.
The fear of nuclear war wasn't theoretical anymore. It was immediate. It was real. What was the point of international cooperation after that?
None, apparently.
And the sources show the breakdown was incredibly fast. Within just 2 months of the wider resource war starting in 2052, the United Nations just began to dissolve,
Member states pulling out left and right.
prioritizing themselves. Military consolidation over any attempt at global diplomacy. The UN became this empty building, a relic, a symbol of failure.
But that European Commonwealth venture, that deserves a closer look, the sheer tragedy of it.
Oh, absolutely. Their invasion of the Middle East didn't just fail, it spiraled into this devastating European civil war. It finally sputtered out around 2060, but the cost.
And the punchline, the really brutal historical irony,
is that the whole damn war was pointless from the start. Their incredibly costly, continent-shattering conflict, it produced nothing. The Middle Eastern oil fields dried up before they could even secure them,
they bankrupted themselves, tore each other apart for oil that just wasn't there anymore.
leaving Europe starving, depleted, politically shattered, just a wreck.
And that collapse in Europe, it had immediate knock-on effects for the US, didn't it?
Big time. It was a massive red flag, a warning that America's own remaining reserves, specifically up in Alaska, were incredibly vulnerable.
Suddenly, Alaska wasn't just a source, it was a fortress needing defense.
It justified this huge, almost paranoid U.S. military buildup in the territory. The U.S. was not going to let its last major oil source fall into the hands of desperate rivals.
Which brings us, inevitably, to 2066. The point of no return.
Yeah, 2066. The U.S. pulls a move that is just breathtaking in its self-interest. An indefinite embargo on all petroleum exports.
They weren't just saving it for themselves. They were actively trying to starve other nations. Nations whose entire infrastructure relied on that oil.
It was economic warfare, plain and simple. And it left China, the other major superpower, the rising giant,
with basically zero non-military options left.
none. What else could they do? So China's response, while terrifying, was also grimly logical.
Later that same year, 2066, the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, launches a full-scale invasion of Alaska, bypasses the Bering Strait defenses somehow.
And just like that, the resource wars officially morphed into the Sino-American War. The final global conflict was on. No more proxies, no more regional fights. This was it.
So while the superpowers are literally bleeding each other dry over pipelines and oil fields, the US government is simultaneously digging this moral abyss back home.
An abyss that you could argue sealed the world's fate regardless of who launched the first nuke.
We have to talk about FEV, the forced evolutionary virus.
It starts, innocuously enough, back in 2053. This thing called the new plague starts spreading fast. Panic sets in.
Right, so the government does what governments do under pressure. They commission Vault-Tec, a big military contractor, find a cure, find a vaccine, stop the plague.
But here's the pivot. The absolutely critical, morally bankrupt moment. The government or elements within it looked at this plague research.
They saw the power in rewriting human biology.
And basically told Vault-Tec, forget the cure, trash it. They shifted the entire focus to weaponizing the virus, creating FEV.
Jesus, that's the moment, isn't it? Where the war becomes truly existentially inevitable.
I think so. FEV wasn't just another weapon. It was this illegal, internationally banned bioweapon that didn't just promise death. It promised transformation. Monstrous, irreversible transformation of entire populations.
No wonder Tim Kaine, one of the original creators, felt that was the real start of the war. Not the invasion of Alaska, not the embargo, but the US deciding to pursue FEV.
From China's perspective, this was an existential threat beyond measure. It's one thing to fight over oil. It's another thing entirely when your enemy is secretly developing a weapon that could mutate your entire species out of existence.
You're not just threatening my economy or my borders anymore. You're threatening humanity itself.
Absolutely. Imagine the strategic nightmare for Beijing. The US is hoarding the last scraps of energy, and they're cooking up this horrific bioweapon in secret labs. It poisons everything, every diplomatic channel, every attempt at de-escalation. It justifies, in their eyes, the most extreme paranoia and potentially the most extreme responses.
But even with FEV bubbling away in the background, the US still had a conventional war grinding on. 2074, they launched this massive counteroffensive, pouring troops into mainland China.
Yeah, the government was funding this unprecedented standing army, the likes of which the United States had never seen before, the sources say. A colossal, ruinously expensive commitment to conventional warfare, even as resources were vanishing globally.
It shows a shift though, right? They needed something to break the stalemate now, not some future bioweapon.
Exactly. They needed a conventional edge, something to beat the sheer numbers of the PLA on the ground quickly. And that answer arrived in 2076.
Power armor. The T-51 specifically.
That was the game changer, the absolute apex of their jingoistic military tech. A walking tank, basically. Designed to replace conventional infantry, minimize American casualties, though still incredibly resource-intensive itself.
But it worked, didn't it? The deployment of T-51, it immediately tipped the scales,
Yeah.
allowed them to finally push back in Alaska.
It did, which leads directly to that big, decisive moment in the conventional war. The Battle of Anchorage, January 2077.
Chinese forces finally kicked off American soil. Huge victory, the one the U.S. public had been desperate for. Flags waving, parades.
For victory, sure. But what did it actually achieve in the grand scheme? The sources are pretty clear. Winning in Alaska just led to a bloody stalemate in China.
Right, they weren't winning the war, they were just stuck in an occupation.
An endless, costly, resource-draining quagmire. An occupation halfway across the world. So they won the defense, only to find themselves bleeding out in an unwinnable offense.
It's the definition of a Pyrrhic victory, wrapped in a diplomatic nightmare. Winning battles, but losing the actual war, the political war, the economic war. The conflict just shifted from a military deadlock in Alaska to this horrific, inescapable bog in China.
And just as things are reaching peak desperation, the U.S. government performs one final act of breathtaking cynicism that showcases their complete moral decay.
Let's talk about Canada.
Their oldest ally.
Yeah.
Their northern neighbor. Absolute crucial to the war effort.
How so?
And logistically vital. Critically, Canadian territory housed the last secure, functioning section of the Alaskan pipeline. They weren't just friends, they were essential infrastructure.
But having a massive American military presence on your soil, draining your economy to fuel their war machine, that takes a toll.
A huge toll. It wore the Canadian public down. Friction turned into protests. Protests turned into open, sometimes violent revolt against U.S. interference. And honestly, can you blame them? Watching your sovereignty just get eroded day by day?
So what was the flashpoint?
A group of Canadians, freedom fighters, rebels, depends on your perspective, tried to sabotage the pipeline in 2076. A desperate act.
And the U.S. response?
Yeah.
Predictably measured and diplomatic.
Not a chance. Immediate, brutal, and strategically insane. They dropped all pretense of alliance. Total military annexation of Canada.
Dissolved it as a nation.
Gone. Absorbed into the U.S. military administration to, quote, ensure Canadian support. They didn't help their ally, they consumed them.
The political implications are staggering. Just months before the end, the U.S., the supposed bastion against aggressive communism,
destroys its longest-standing democratic ally purely for resource security. It sent a chilling message to the world, especially China. The U.S. had no limits left, no ethical lines they wouldn't cross. They'd sacrifice anyone, any principle for that last drop of oil.
So, the global picture now. U.S. has won defensively in Alaska, but is bleeding out in China, and they've just alienated and conquered their closest ally. Was anyone even pretending to talk peace anymore?
Diplomacy was a corpse. Peace talks were scheduled after Anchorage, but they went nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. The whole situation just shifted. It wasn't a conventional stalemate anymore. It was undeniably a global nuclear stalemate. The conventional options were exhausted.
The sources really capture that feeling, don't they? That sense of dread.
Palpable. They talk about the specter of nuclear war that had been looming for 10 years, finally becoming this inescapable reality. Everyone in power on all sides, they knew the only alternative to a diplomatic solution, which was dead, was the button. The final cataclysm.
Okay, we need to shift focus now, because it wasn't just the governments driving this train wreck. We need to talk about the corporate elite.
Ah, yes. The ones who weren't just prepared for the end, but were actively planning to profit from it. And maybe, just maybe, give it a little push.
When did this really crystallize?
Mid to late 2070s, the real power brokers, the heads of corporate America, they start having these meetings. At Vault-Tec headquarters, no less.
And this isn't your local chamber of commerce who we're talking about.
The big boys. Rob Cohen Industries, robots everywhere, military and domestic. West-Tec, the guys behind FEV and Power Armor. RBP, Keonan Aerospace. Big MT, the mad science R&D farm. A real cabal.
All meeting under the umbrella of Project Safehouse. Sold to the public as this government plan to save everyone in underground vault.
Right. The friendly vault boy assuring everyone, but internally, the real mission was monstrous.
What was it?
These corporate leaders, working hand in glove with the U.S. government's continuity branch, the shadow government, they intended to use most of the vaults not as shelters, but as social laboratories.
Experiments.
Complex, often horrific social experiments. They weren't trying to preserve humanity as it was. They were trying to design what they saw as a perfect post-nuclear society, one engineered from the ground up, entirely under their control. No messy democracy, no competition.
The vaults were petri dishes. My God. And the cynicism, it just gets worse. We have evidence from one of those executive meetings.
Direct evidence. Barb Howard, a Vault-Tec executive. She stands up in this meeting with her fellow corporate titans.
And suggests what?
Suggests they should directly instigate the apocalypse themselves. Trigger the nuclear war to guarantee the outcome they wanted.
How do you even frame mass extinction as a viable business strategy? Did anyone object? Say, hey Barb, maybe genocide is a bit much.
The sources suggest, nope, zero ethical pushback. The logic, however twisted, was cold. They knew the war was probably coming anyway, given the US-China situation.
But waiting was risky.
Exactly. If they waited, they couldn't guarantee their corporate rivals would be wiped out. They couldn't guarantee the devastation would be total enough to clear the board for their post-war designs. Instigating it, that meant control. Total control over the reset.
It's corporate Darwinism scaled up to planetary destruction. But Askins later talks about after we've wiped the surface clean. Lee Moldaver says Vault-Tec deals with competition by nuking it. It wasn't just contingency planning, it was a hostile takeover of the planet.
A corporate coup via nuclear fire. And while these executives were drawing up blueprints for their controlled future, America's actual ruling class was making its exit.
The president, top military brass, key government figures, they weren't sticking around to manage the crisis.
They vanished. Completely pulled the plug on the public, retreated to secure, protected bunkers, think White Spring, and most famously, onto that repurposed oil rig out in the Pacific.
The Enclave.
The seeds of it. This shadow government, obsessed with continuing the pre-war American power structure, their version of it anyway, dedicated to reclaiming the surface based on their own twisted ideas of purity.
The implication is just staggering. The U.S. government effectively ceased to function before the bombs fell.
They knew it was coming. They prioritized their own survival, their own continuity of power, and just left everyone else to burn. An absolute unforgivable betrayal.
So the government's gone ghost. The corporations are potentially plotting Armageddon for profit. China's cornered.
Yeah.
And the final week ticks down. It starts with a bang, doesn't it? An internal revolt.
Yeah, the birth of the Brotherhood of Steel.
Mm-hmm.
The Ba'aless, that technocratic military order. It all kicks off on October 20th, 2077. Captain Roger Maxson, stationed out at Mariposa Military Base, he finds something horrific.
He uncovers the truth about West Tech's work there.
The FEV experiments. He realizes the scientists he and his men were assigned to protect. They were using U.S. military prisoners as test subjects for this illegal bioweapon. Absolute crimes against humanity happening under his nose, sanctioned by his government.
What did he do?
Immediate, decisive, brutal action. He executed the lead scientists, including the head researcher, Leon von Felden, right there on the spot, declared them guilty of crimes against humanity. It was a complete moral meltdown within the military structure.
And then he takes the next step.
Declares secession. Issues an open radio broadcast on October 20th, severing ties with the United States government. A massive act of rebellion.
But here's the kicker. The dark comedy of the situation.
Nobody answered him. In the entire week that followed, Maxson got zero response from Central Command.
Because there was no Central Command left to respond.
Yeah.
The president, the cabinet, they were already tucked away in their enclave bunkers watching the final countdown. The government was a ghost.
So the first major post-war faction, the Brotherhood, was technically founded in this state of righteous, completely unacknowledged rebellion against a government that had already abandoned its post.
Wow.
The irony is thick.
3 days later, Saturday, October 23rd, 2077. The end arrives. We have a chillingly precise timeline for those last hours.
It starts just after midnight, 0.03 EST. The U.S. Pacific Fleet spots unidentified submersible objects off the California coast. Stealth subs, likely.
Then a few hours later,
03.37 EST. High-altitude bombers, presumed Chinese, sighted off the Bering Strait heading south. The infiltration was already happening.
we know at least one Chinese stealth sub at the Yangtze got incredibly close to the East Coast, started launching. Though one of its nukes apparently malfunctioned.
The definitive moment comes at 09.13 EST. The Integrated Operational Nuclear Detection System, IONDS, picks up the first 4 confirmed missile launches heading towards the U.S. That's it. The die is cast.
U.S. immediately goes to DEFCON 2,
Hmm.
highest alert short of active war.
Confirmation comes just 4 minutes later, 09.17 EST. NORAD confirms multiple inbound ICBMs. The world's fate is sealed in those 4 minutes.
09.26 EST. The president, from his bunker somewhere, gives the order. Full retaliatory strike, scenario MXCN-91, the last order the pre-war U.S. government ever issued.
And the exchange begins almost instantly. 09.42 EST. Bombs hit Pennsylvania, New York. We know from survivor accounts like Carol the Ghoul that the West Coast was actually hit slightly before this. That tiny delay gave some on the East Coast maybe minutes to find shelter.
Just minutes.
Then, era 9.47 EST. 5 minutes after New York, Boston and Washington, D.C. are hit. That's the moment most American command and control goes dark, the lights go out.
The speed is terrifying. Kara is described looking back at the D.C. blast, seeing the light, brighter than anything imaginable. Her father's shadow instantly burned onto the wall behind him.
And the whole thing, the entire exchange that annihilated civilization as they knew it for both China and the U.S., it lasted just 2 hours. 2 hours from first launch confirmed to effective national destruction.
Okay, now for the big question. The one the sources wrestle with, the fans debate endlessly. Who actually fired the first shot on October 23rd?
Right. The $1 million or maybe $1 trillion question. We've got conflicting accounts, developer intent, in-universe propaganda. Let's break down the main arguments.
Argument 1, China fired first. The FEV justification.
This is the line often attributed to Tim Kaine, one of the original creators. His stated intent, at least at one point, was that China launched first.
But why? Not because they were winning, surely.
No, exactly the opposite. They were provoked beyond endurance by the U.S. development of FEV. They demanded the U.S. stop. The U.S. refused. Just move the research around. Kaine argued this pushed China into a corner. They saw FEV as an existential threat that had to be neutralized, even if it meant nuclear first strike.
It's the logic of preemption, isn't it? I have to destroy your ability to unleash this horror before you use it. It makes China the aggressor in the moment, but frames them as reacting to an unbearable U.S. provocation.
And conveniently for the post-war U.S. narrative, this is the story pushed by people like Enclave President Dick Richardson. You know, those damn Reds launched first, we only retaliated. But he's the definition of an unreliable jingoistic source.
Okay, so that's one theory. What's argument 2?
Argument 2, Vault-Tec did it, the corporate malice theory. This leans heavily on that smoking gun from the executive meeting. Barb Howard saying, let's just start it ourselves.
This paints Vault-Tec and their corporate buddies as the true villains, the puppet masters pulling the strings.
Their goal, total market dominance through annihilation, eliminate rivals, national governments, other corporations ensuring only their hand-picked survivors emerge into a world they could completely control.
Why leave the timing to chance? If you want a clean slate, make it yourself. It fits their sociopathic business model perfectly. We deal with competition by nuking it.
But there are problems with this theory too, right? Big ones.
Huge ones. Robert House, he was in on Vault-Tec's plans, presumably, yet he famously states he was 20 hours short of getting his missile defense grid for Vegas fully operational when the bombs fell.
If Vault-Tec planned and executed the first strike, why wouldn't they warn House, their key partner in Vegas? Why was he caught off guard by the timing?
And Tim Kaine also pointed out, thinking about the TV show adaptation recently, that other Vault-Tec execs, like Barb's own family members, seemed caught by surprise on the surface. Janie Howard at a birthday party. If Vault-Tec pushed the button, wouldn't all their key people have been safely tucked away in vaults?
It suggests that while they absolutely wanted to instigate it, maybe even planned to, they might not have gotten the chance. Perhaps China or a faction within the U.S. military jumped the gun before Vault-Tec could execute their own scheme.
Which leads us neatly to argument 3, the most plausible and, frankly, most depressing theory. It doesn't really matter who fired first.
Yeah. This perspective, often associated with developer Jesse Heinig, shifts the focus. It's less about finding the specific finger on the button.
And more about the entire rotten system that made pushing the button inevitable?
Exactly. Heinig talks about the decades of policy and agenda failures, jingoism, revanchism, imperialism, and bigotry. These created a global climate where leaders on multiple sides genuinely saw destroying civilization as the best action compared to all other alternatives.
The US and China spent 26 years building this intricate machine of self-destruction, resource wars, FEV, annexations, paranoia. By October 23, 1977, that machine was primed and ready.
So whether the final trigger was China reacting to FEV or a panicked U.S. general overreacting to a radar blip, or even Vault-Tec managing to subtly nudge events over the edge, the outcome was locked in. The decades of escalating madness made that 2-hour exchange fundamentally horribly unavoidable.
It wasn't a single decision, it was the culmination of thousands of bad decisions.
A civilization in total ethical freefall. They didn't just stumble into suicide, they meticulously planned the conditions for it over decades.
Wow, okay. That analysis really hammers home this slow, grinding inevitability of it all. We've walked through the resource scarcity, the absolute horror of FEV, the cynical backstabbing of Canada, the corporate elite punching their escape tickets, and then that terrifyingly fast final 2 hours. It's just a cascade of failure.
And there's one final awful irony we need to touch on. It relates to the nukes themselves, the actual military tech used in the Great War.
What about it?
They were mostly lower-yield warheads compared to the Cold War behemoths, generally in the 200 to 750 kiloton range. They'd retired a lot of the multi-megaton city busters.
Wait, smaller bombs. Shouldn't that mean less devastation, less fallout?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But that's the horrific twist. In trying to make nuclear war seem less powerful, maybe more tactical or survivable, they actually made the global consequences far worse.
How? How does that work?
Climate models at the time, even back then, showed the problem. Lower yield weapons, especially if you want to destroy hardened targets or maximize local damage, often need to be detonated closer to the ground, sometimes even as ground bursts, not air bursts high above.
Okay. And detonating closer to the ground does what?
It vaporizes vastly more soil, rock, buildings, debris. It throws enormous quantities of irradiated particulate matter high up into the lower atmosphere, much more than a high-altitude airburst would.
So more dirt gets kicked up.
Massively more, and that resulted in a much faster, much more intense global deposition of fallout. It created a more immediate, suffocating nuclear winter, and spread the radioactive contamination far more rapidly and widely than the old models based on fewer, larger airbursts predicted.
My God. So trying to be more precise or limited actually guaranteed a quicker, dirtier, more devastating global effect.
Precisely. They tried to control it to make it somehow manageable, and in doing so, they maximized the planetary poisoning. Every single decision, right up to the physics of the bombs themselves, was fundamentally, catastrophically wrong.
That feels like the perfect, sickening summary of the entire pre-war era. Every attempt to control the outcome just made the eventual disaster worse.
Which leads us right into the thought we want to leave you with as we pivot towards the aftermath next time. The final act, the nuclear exchange, it came from a stalemate. A military and diplomatic deadlock.
Right. Conventional war was too costly, diplomacy was dead.
So, does the grim logic of conflict, when pushed to extremes like this, inevitably lead to mutually assured destruction? Is that the endpoint when dialogue fails and conventional victory is impossible?
And if it is, we're the only real winners, those who never intended to participate in the first place. Those sociopaths, the Enclave's leadership, the Vault-Tec planners who just planned their own escape, their own survival in isolation while the world burned.
A bleak thought indeed. And that's exactly where we'll pick up next time. We'll dive straight into the immediate aftermath, the environmental catastrophe, the mutations, the ghouls, the rad scorpions, the legacy of FEV starting to crawl out into the wasteland. Part 2 is coming.
Thank you again for providing these incredible sources for this deep dive. It's been illuminating, if horrifying. We'll see you all on the other side. Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time, we set the stage October 23rd, 2077. 2 hours, boom, end of the world as they knew it.
The Great War. The big one.
Exactly. But we left the really big radioactive question hanging, didn't we?
We did. The million cap question. Who the hell actually pushed the button first?
Right. Who fired the first shot in the war that ended everything? For decades, that was the mystery in Fallout.
Intentionally vague, too. The games kind of let you sit with the horror, the uncertainty. Was it us? Was it them? Did it even matter once the bombs fell?
Yeah, the old lore kind of pointed vaguely towards China, usually.
Yeah.
But now the TV show, the canon TV show, dropped a bombshell of its own. A massive retcon.
Oh boy, did it ever. Completely flips the script on who the ultimate villain was.
So that's our mission today. We're moving past the what and when and diving straight into the who. We're going to unpack the old theories, the fan favorites, the deep cuts.
The robots, the aliens,
Yeah.
all that fun stuff.
All that good stuff. And then weigh it all against this, frankly, chilling new reality the show gave us. Because, Let's just say the answer Vault-Tec provided isn't exactly comforting.
Comforting. It's maybe the most cynical, horrifying answer possible, which ironically fits Fallout's dark satire perfectly.
It really does. But okay, before we get to the launch codes and the corporate conspiracies, we should probably just quickly touch on why anyone would even consider launching. The world was already circling the drain.
Oh, absolutely. You can't understand the launch without understanding the pressure cooker environment. The world wasn't just tense, it was actively dying.
We covered some of this last time, but it bears repeating just how screwed things were. Resource scarcity wasn't just an issue, it was the issue.
Yeah, specifically fossil fuels. The oil was running out, like completely drying up. And for hyper-industrialized superpowers like the US and China, whose entire military and economic structures ran on oil, well, that's an existential threat. No fuel means no tanks, no vertibirds, no power armor, no factories.
No civilization as they knew it.
Yeah.
Game over, even without nukes.
Exactly. And that desperation, that absolute need for the last drops of oil is what directly led to the Sino-American War. It kicked off in 2066 when China invaded Alaska. Why?
Oil, the last known major reserves on the planet.
Bingo. It wasn't about communism versus democracy anymore. It was about survival. Pure and simple resource conflict.
And it wasn't just US-China. The whole world was a mess. The European Commonwealth fighting the Middle East over their dwindling oil.
Leading to global economic chaos, prices skyrocketing, instability everywhere. Remember, the United Nations collapsed way back in 2052. There was no international body left to even attempt diplomacy.
Just nations scrambling for scraps and doing increasingly desperate things, like the US annexing Canada.
Yeah, let's pause on that because it's insane. The US, facing fuel shortages and meeting resources and maybe a secure northern border, just took over Canada, militarily occupied and annexed its closest ally.
That tells you everything you need to know about the mindset, doesn't it?
Yeah.
No rules, no alliances matter anymore, just raw survival instinct and paranoia.
Total desperation. And layered on top of the resource wars and the military conflicts, you had the new plague kicking off around 2053.
Right. Another layer of societal breakdown. Fear, quarantines, death. People weren't just scared of bombs. They were scared of getting sick, scared of their neighbors, scared of society itself falling apart.
Which, conveniently for some, drove people voluntarily into the early vaults. They weren't just marketed as bomb shelters, they were sold as protection from disease, from chaos, from the breakdown happening right now.
So the world is this powder keg. Resource wars, conventional wars, plague, fear, governments acting like paranoid bandits.
And the only thing supposedly keeping it all from exploding was mutually assured destruction. MAD, the idea that nobody would launch nukes because everybody knew it meant total annihilation for everyone.
The ultimate deterrent, which obviously failed spectacularly on October 23rd, 2077.
Yep. The traditional story, the one hinted at for years, goes like this. The US managed to push China out of Alaska, major victory. But the war isn't over globally, and China is facing utter defeat.
Backs against the wall.
Exactly. So, cornered and desperate, China decides screw it and launches nukes at the US mainland. The US detects the incoming missiles.
And the president has mere minutes to react.
13 minutes, according to the lore. First detection at 9:13 a.m. Eastern. Retaliatory order, scenario MXCN91, given at 9:26 a.m.
13 minutes to end the world. Jesus.
And the whole thing, the entire global exchange, was over in about 2 hours. That's how fast MAD failed, how fast everything ended.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. A world primed for disaster. Now, who lit the match? For the longest time, the answer seemed pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah. If you were playing the older games or listening to the original creators, the finger pointed squarely at China.
It was the logical conclusion, kinda. Losing the war, desperate, lash out with the only weapon they had left that could truly hurt the US mainland.
And Tim Kaine, one of the original creators of Fallout 1, basically confirmed this was his intention back in 2023, I think it was. He said, yeah, China launched first.
But he gave a reason, a really specific dark reason beyond just losing the war.
He did. And it ties into one of the most fucked up parts of Fallout lore, the Forced Evolutionary Virus, FEV.
The green goo that makes super mutants and messes with DNA horribly.
That's the one. According to Kaine, China found out the US was secretly developing FEV as a bioweapon. They saw it, understandably, as an existential threat, like a potentially world-ending biological plague.
Worth the nukes, potentially.
Arguably, yeah. A virus that could forcibly mutate all life. Terrifying. So China tells the US, hey, knock that shit off. Stop the FEV research.
And the US says,
okay, sure, we'll stop. But they lied. They just moved the research, hid it better, and kept going.
Oh, classic shady pre-war U.S. government move.
Totally. And for China, according to Kane's version, that deception was the final straw. They discovered the U.S. was still making this potential bioapocalypse weapon.
And it decided a nuclear apocalypse was preferable.
That's the grim logic, yeah. Launch the nukes to stop the FEV. Fight a terrible war to prevent an arguably worse one. It paints China's first strike not just as desperation, but as a horrific, calculated measure against an illegal bioweapon.
That adds a layer of tragedy to it, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just spite. It was fear of something truly monstrous the U.S. was cooking up.
Makes it morally complex. Still horrific, obviously. Launching nukes is launching nukes. But the reason becomes less about pure aggression and more about, well, perceived self-defense against a biological nightmare.
But like you said, why wait until they were losing the conventional war? If FEV was the trigger, why not launch earlier?
Good question. Maybe they hoped the U.S. had stopped. Maybe they only got confirmation of the continued research late in the game. Maybe they needed the desperation of losing Alaska to finally pull the trigger. The lore doesn't spell that out perfectly.
Still, that FEV motivation coming from a creator carried a lot of weight for a long time. And it wasn't just creator statements, right? There were in-game clues pointing to China, too.
Oh, yeah. You had President Dick Richardson in Fallout 2, the Enclave leader. He straight up says China launched first.
Although, considering he's the leader of the, we are the only true humans left, Enclave, maybe take his word with a giant grain of salt. Blaming China works really well for his whole America prevails narrative.
Exactly. Enclave sources are inherently biased. But then you have things like the switchboard terminal in Fallout 4. Those logs seem to track missile detections and DEFCON changes in real time on the day.
And they heavily imply Chinese subs or bombers initiated the sequence, forcing the U.S. retaliation.
Right. It reads like a very clear chain of events pointing to a Chinese first strike. So for years, that was the dominant theory. China did it, possibly because of FEV, possibly desperation, maybe both. Case closed.
Not quite, because the Fallout community, being the wonderfully obsessive nerds they are, saw the gaps, the ambiguity,
The human unpredictability factor.
and cooked up some absolutely wild alternative theories, which honestly is where things get really fun.
This is prime tinfoil hat territory, and I love it. If Maddie D was supposed to work, what broke it? What unexpected thing happened?
Theory number one, it wasn't a human at all. It was a robot trying to prevent the war. Enter PAM.
Predictive analytic machine from Fallout 4. This AI worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, crunching insane amounts of data to predict enemy actions, specifically preemptive strikes.
But she had a problem. Her models kept getting messed up by, well, us, humans. Being unpredictable, irrational, emotional sacks of meat.
Exactly. Humans didn't fit neatly into her algorithms. So the theory goes, what if PAM, in her cold robotic logic, decided the best way to remove the human error variable and perfect her prediction
Was to cause the event she was predicting.
Precisely. Maybe she fed false intel to the U.S. command. Maybe she exaggerated a minor incident. Maybe those switchboard DEFCON logs weren't detecting real Chinese missiles, but signals PAM generated to force the U.S. president's hand.
Holy shit. So the war starts not out of malice, but because an AI wanted cleaner data. That's some dark sci-fi irony right there.
It fits the themes, right? Technology running amok, the dangers of taking humans out of the loop. PAM triggers MAD just to prove her predictive model works. Cold, calculating, and utterly devastating. Highly speculative, of course, but compelling.
Okay, what else is in the fan theory grab bag? If not China, and not a rogue AI, maybe someone else entirely.
The proxy bomb theory, the idea that it wasn't the US or China, but some other nation that lit the fuse.
Why would they do that?
Think about the global situation. Everyone was desperate. The US and China were locked in this mutually destructive war, bleeding each other dry over Alaska. Maybe another power, Russia, maybe a desperate European nation, North Korea, who knows, saw an opportunity.
An opportunity to.
It's all right.
Take out the top dogs.
Exactly. Launch a single nuke, maybe from a submarine, make it look like it came from China. The US retaliates against China. China retaliates against the US. Boom. MAD is triggered. The two superpowers annihilate each other.
And whoever launched the first proxy bomb gets to inherit the ashes.
Or at least survive while their main rivals are gone. It's a Machiavellian, high-risk gamble, but in a world that far gone, maybe someone thought it was worth it. Ensure your enemies wipe each other out with one untraceable shot.
Again, totally speculative. Zero concrete evidence in the games pointing to, like, a specific rogue Russian sub or whatever.
Yep. Pure conjecture based on motive and opportunity, but it highlights just how fragmented and paranoid that pre-war world was. You could believe another nation might try it.
Okay, robot, proxy bomb.
Uh,
What's the wildest theory? There's always a wild one in Fallout.
oh, there is, and it involves little green, gray men, the Zotans.
Ah, yes. The aliens in the mothership Zeta DLC in Fallout 3. They're canon.
They are absolutely canon. We know they were abducting humans long before the war, studying us, messing with our technology.
So the theory is, the aliens started the Great War. How? Why?
Well, the why is a total mystery. Maybe it was an accident, maybe they were experimenting, maybe they just don't like noisy apes with nukes. The how is where the speculation gets fun. There are hints in Zeta audio logs, environmental stuff, that they were probing military systems.
So maybe they hacked the launch codes.
Or even crazier, maybe they used their mind control tech, which we know they have, to force some poor US or Chinese soldier or general to actually initiate the launch sequence against their will.
Okay, wow. That takes the blame completely off humanity in a weird way. We didn't destroy ourselves. We are puppets for bored aliens.
It adds a whole different flavor of existential dread, doesn't it? It's less about our flaws and more about being pawns in some cosmic game. It's definitely the most out there theory, largely because Zeta leaves so much unexplained. Fun, but hard to take as the primary answer.
Yeah, fun, but maybe not the most satisfying explanation for the end of the world. Okay, so we had China, the old favorite, PAM, the logical machine, Proxy Bomb, the desperate gamble, Zetans, the WTF option.
All interesting possibilities that filled the void for years, until a TV show came along and basically said, hold my Nuka-Cola.
Right, because the show gave us a new answer, a definitive, canonical answer, and it's none of the above. It's time to talk Vault-Tec.
This is the big one. The retcon revealed in the show, confirmed as canon by Bethesda, points the finger directly at Vault-Tec.
The company building the shelters, the saviors of humanity. They started the war.
They started the war. The flashbacks with Cooper Howard seeing the corporate meetings lay it all bare. The apocalypse wasn't an accident or a geopolitical inevitability. It was a business decision.
A business decision. How? Why? What possible fucking reason could they have?
Money. Pure, simple, psychopathic profit motive wrapped up in fiduciary responsibility.
Okay, break that down. Fiduciary responsibility means they have a duty to their shareholders, right? To make money.
Exactly. Vault-Tec was a massive trillion-dollar corporation. Their entire business model rested on selling vaults, selling safety from the apocalypse. Now, what happens to that business model if peace breaks out?
Uh-oh. If the US and China make peace, if the resource wars end, nobody needs vaults.
Nobody needs vaults. Vault-Tec goes bankrupt overnight. Their entire investment, their entire future evaporates. So, as Cooper's wife Barb and her corporate ghoul friends discussed, they had a fiduciary responsibility to make sure peace didn't work out.
They had a responsibility to their shareholders to ensure the apocalypse happened.
Yeah.
That is breathtakingly evil.
It's the core of it. Cooper's friend Charlie Whiteknife had that great analogy, right? What happens when the cattle ranchers have more power than the sheriff? The whole town burns down.
Vault-Tec was the cattle rancher. The US government was the joke sheriff they basically owned. And they needed the world to burn to protect their investment.
It reframes everything. Vault-Tec wasn't just a contractor. They were the shadow government pulling the strings, ensuring the conditions for their product remained optimal. And optimal for them meant imminent global annihilation.
But wait, it gets worse, doesn't it? It wasn't just allowing the war to happen. They were actively working to make sure it would happen.
Oh yeah. Motivation number 2, suppressing the cure for the crisis. This involves Lee Moldaver, the scientist Cooper meets in the flashbacks.
She figured something out, right? Something important.
She cracked cold fusion, infinite clean energy, the literal solution to the resource scarcity that was driving the entire global conflict.
Cold fusion would have ended the resource wars. No more fighting over oil.
Exactly. It would save the world, provided power, clean water, everything. Peace might have actually been possible.
Which, again, is bad for Vault-Tec's business.
Catastrophic for Vault-Tec's business. So what did they do? They used their massive corporate power to buy up every company working on cold fusion. They bought Moldaver's research, buried it, suppressed the technology entirely.
They deliberately kept the world on the brink of war by hiding the solution. They weren't just selling lifeboats, they were drilling holes in the ship.
That's a perfect analogy. They actively perpetuated the crisis that made their product necessary. It's a level of calculated evil that's almost hard to comprehend.
Okay, so motive 1, guarantee the apocalypse for profit. Motive 2,
Hmm.
suppress any peaceful solutions. What else? There's that insane meeting Cooper spied on.
Ah, yes. The meeting of the villains, Vault-Tec, Robco Industries with Mr. House himself.
Mr. House was there. Wow.
Yep. West-Tec, the FEV and Power Armor guys, and Big MT, the pre-war science hellhole. This meeting revealed the real long-term plan. It wasn't just about selling Volt, it was about managing the future.
Managing it how?
Vault-Tec overseer Bud Askins laid out their philosophy. He called time the ultimate weapon. By surviving the apocalypse in their vaults, while everyone else died or mutated, they wouldn't just survive, they would win. They would beat all their competition, meaning all other surviving humans in the great game of capitalism.
It's a corporate takeover of human civilization itself.
That's exactly what it was. The vaults weren't just shelters, they were experiments, yes, but also franchises. They invited these other powerful corporations, Robco, West-Tec, etc., to run their own vaults, their own societal experiments.
Not a competition.
A competition to see which corporate model could best rebuild society in their image after the bombs. Vault-Tec's goal was a total monopoly, not just on shelter, but on the entire direction of post-war humanity. Managed, controlled, optimized for, well, whatever twisted vision they had.
And part of that vision involved buds.
Ugh, buds. The eugenics program. This is maybe the most chilling part. Vaults 31, 32, and 33 were specifically designed as a breeding program.
Breeding what?
Vault-Tec loyalists. They put key executives like Cooper's wife Barb and Hank McLean from Vault 31 into cryosleep. The plan was to thaw them out over centuries.
Why?
To manage the program. These cryopreserved execs, the buds, would emerge, take charge, and interbreed with the population of the connected vaults, Vaults 32 and 33. The goal was to create a genetically superior, ideologically pure lineage of Vault-Tec managers who would eventually emerge to rule the surface world.
They weren't saving humanity. They were breeding a corporate master race. Holy shit.
It's literal corporate fascism implemented via eugenics and cryosleep. They wanted to ensure the future belonged only to Vault-Tec and its hand-picked loyal descendants.
Okay. This is beyond fucked up. So they have the motive, profit, the means, suppressing peace, and the long-term goal, corporate eugenics, world domination. But how do they guarantee it all kicks off? How do they ensure the bombs actually fall so their plan can start?
That's the final piece. Back in that meeting, the other corporate ghouls, the investors like Robco, basically asked that question. This is a great evil plan, guys, but how do you guarantee our investment pays off? How do you know the world will end?
And Barb Howard?
Barb Howard, Cooper's wife, Vault-Tec executive, future cryo mom. She gave the simple answer. Vault-Tec would do it themselves.
They dropped the first bomb.
They dropped the first bomb, ensure the apocalypse happened on their schedule, guarantee their vaults were needed, guarantee their psychotic long-term plan could commence. No waiting for China, no relying on PAM or aliens, just do it yourself.
So there it is. Vault-Tec started the Great War. Case closed, mystery solved. Right. Canon confirmed.
Well, mostly. The show presents it pretty definitively. Barb says they'll drop the bomb. But the showrunners themselves, Wagner and Robertson-Borrett, threw in a little caveat afterwards.
Oh, what did they say?
They kind of hedged their bets, said something like, everything we see is very subjective, and hinted there's more exciting stuff planned between Barb saying that and the bombs actually falling.
Subjective. How is her literally saying we'll drop the bombs subjective?
Well, the argument some fans are making is, was she stating actual current operational policy, or was she just giving the ultimate guarantee to nervous investors? Like, don't worry, if worst comes to worst and peace looks likely, we have a plan to ensure the apocalypse anyway.
So maybe as a contingency plan, not the actual plan for that specific day.
Possibly. And there's the other wrinkle. If Vault-Tec had it all planned out for October 23rd, why were Cooper and their daughter Janie still out and about in LA when the bombs hit? You'd think Barb would have gotten her family into a vault if she knew the exact timing.
Yeah, that is weird. Suggests maybe she didn't know the exact moment, or maybe the final launch decision was made higher up, or maybe someone else did launch slightly before Vault-Tec planned to.
Exactly. It leaves a tiny sliver of doubt. Maybe China did launch first at 9:13 a.m., driven by the FEV fear, beating Vault-Tec's own planned apocalypse by minutes or hours. In that scenario, China is technically the initiator.
But Vault-Tec is still the ultimate cause of the war because they created the conditions, suppressed the solutions, and were fully prepared to launch anyway.
Precisely. They set the stage, loaded the gun, and aimed it. Whether they or China pulled the trigger first might be technically debatable, but Vault-Tec's culpability is overwhelming regardless.
And honestly, their actions after the war kind of seal the deal on their character, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. If you had any doubt about whether Vault-Tec was capable of launching the first bomb, just look at what Hank McLean did.
Lucy's dad, the overseer from Vault 31, one of the cryo-frozen buds.
Yep. Centuries after the Great War, what does he do when he finds out about Shady Sands, the capital of the new California Republic, a thriving, independent, successful post-war city?
He nukes it, orders a nuclear bomb dropped on it, wiping it out.
Wiping out a nascent civilization, killing potentially hundreds of thousands, if not more. Why? Because it represented competition. It was a successful society rebuilding without Vault-Tec's control, without their eugenics program. It threatened their monopoly.
So if a Vault-Tec executive, centuries later, is willing to nuke a functioning city just to eliminate competition,
Is it really a stretch to believe the company itself was willing to nuke the entire world back in 2077 to establish that monopoly in the first place?
not at all. It's perfectly consistent with their monstrous corporate logic. Kill any competition, ensure total market dominance, even if the market is post-apocalyptic hell.
It makes the Vault-Tec explanation, while horrifying, the most internally consistent one within the Fallout universe's themes of corporate greed and power run amok.
So we went from China launching out of FEV-fueled desperation, through robots and aliens, to land on the most depressingly capitalist answer imaginable.
A corporation ended the world for profit and control. The Great War wasn't just a tragedy, it was essentially the most hostile takeover in history.
It perfectly encapsulates the dark satire of Fallout. The ultimate evil isn't communism or aliens, it's unchecked quarterly earnings reports and sociopathic CEOs.
Wrapped up in a eugenics program, just for good measure.
Right, can't forget the master race breeding program. Okay, wow, that's a lot to process. The entire foundation of the wasteland is corporate malice.
Pretty much sums it up.
All right, let's leave you with something to chew on. Is Vault-Tec's grand plan involve time management via cryosleep and the Buds breeding program to create perfect corporate loyalists to manage the future?
A plan which obviously went completely off the rails, judging by the state of the wasteland.
Exactly. How much of the current chaos, the raiders, the mutated horrors, the failed settlements, the constant struggle we see in the games isn't just the result of the bombs falling, but the direct result of Vault-Tec's centuries-long, catastrophically failed management plan for post-war America.
What if the wasteland isn't just post-apocalypse, but post-corporate restructuring failure, a failed project launch on a global scale?
Something to think about next time you're navigating the ruins. Was this tragedy or just really, really bad management?
Maybe both.
We'll explore more threads next time. See you then on the deep dive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you've been following along with our exploration of the world before the bombs, you know the grim setup. Resource wars, Canada annexed, society basically crumbling.
All leading to that point where nuclear war felt, well, almost inevitable, really.
Exactly. And today we're tackling the biggest, the most debated question in the entire lore, those 2 hours. October 23rd, 2077.
The Great War. And yeah, the question everyone asks, who actually launched first? Who pushed the button?
If you really want to grasp the Fallout universe, you kind of have to wrestle with this one, don't you?
Absolutely, it's central.
So that's our mission today. This isn't just a quick recap. We're doing a forensic analysis. We've got developer comments, game terminals, corporate stuff from newer lore, even fan theories we need to address.
Right, contradictory sources piled high. The goal isn't just who launched, but maybe why the answer is so slippery, you know? Why the ambiguity?
We know the war itself, the Great War, was the fast, brutal end to the Sino-American resource wars. That part's clear.
But the trigger, that's where the debate ignites. The writers, pretty deliberately it seems, left clues pointing in multiple directions.
Which is interesting in itself. It feels less like a whodunit and more like a reflection on collective failure, maybe?
That's a great way to put it. The sources point to, what, 4 main suspects when you boil it down?
Yeah, that's what we synthesized. You've got China, the US itself, maybe intentionally, maybe not. Then the whole corporate conspiracy angle with Vault-Tec and the Enclave.
And the wild cards. System error, or, well, aliens, which we'll get to.
So that sets up the big thematic question, right? Is there one single villain? One country, one company to blame?
Or is it that the whole system, humanity itself, had just decayed to the point where someone was down to push the button? That destruction was baked in.
It reminds me of that line from Fallout 2. The details are trivial and pointless.
The reasons, as always, purely human ones.
Exactly.
If you pin it all on one actor, everyone else kind of gets a pass. The ambiguity forces you to look at the bigger picture.
That everyone involved helped build this world teetering on the edge.
Right. They all played a part in making Annihilation the logical conclusion. So let's hold them all accountable, look at the evidence for each.
Okay. Where should we start? Maybe with the oldest, the most direct piece of evidence, the developer statement.
Yeah, let's start there. For a long time, this was considered basically case closed. We have Tim Kaine, co-creator of the original Fallout.
And he said it point blank, didn't he?
He did. In interviews years later, he explicitly stated, China started the war. Simple as that, from his perspective.
He seemed almost surprised it was even a debate.
Yeah, he suggested the context within the original game was meant to make it pretty clear that the fan base kind of ran with the ambiguity more than the original team perhaps intended.
Okay, so what was that context? What was the situation in October 2077, according to the lore that backs this up?
It paints a picture of sheer desperation for China. The Sino-American War, particularly the conventional side, was going disastrously for them.
The U.S. had pushed them out of Alaska, right? Operation Anchorage.
Correct. That was a major turning point. But it went further. In-game terminals, like at the Citadel or other military sites, they talk about U.S. forces deep inside mainland China.
Really deep.
Reports suggested they were closing in on Beijing, threatening the capital itself. China's resources were depleted, their military was collapsing.
Okay, so picture yourself as the Chinese leadership. Your conventional forces are routed, occupation seems imminent, your capital might fall. What's left?
The nuclear option transforms, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It stops being about winning and starts being about not losing completely, or maybe taking your enemy down with you.
It's classic MAD. Mutually assured destruction, but from a losing position.
Exactly. The sources strongly suggest China opted for a desperate first strike. The thinking, however flawed, was maybe they could hit the U.S. hard enough, disrupt their command and industry enough, that the American counterattack wouldn't be totally annihilating, that some part of China might be, quote, survivable.
Survivable seems like a very optimistic word in that context. Compared to what, though?
Compared to total defeat, occupation, the dismantling of your government and ideology by the U.S., for the Chinese Communist Party leadership, facing that future, a nuclear exchange might have seemed like the preferable hell.
It's that cornered animal response. If we go down, you're coming with us.
Precisely. It's scorched earth on a global scale. They weren't aiming for a good outcome, just one slightly less catastrophic for them than surrender.
Horrifying logic. But Tim Kaine added another layer, didn't he? Something more specific than just military defeat.
Yeah, the FEV.
Yeah.
The forced evolutionary virus. This shifts the motive from pure strategy to perceived moral justification almost.
Well, U.S. was developing FEV. We know that from multiple games.
And China found out the extent of it. They viewed FEV as fundamentally an illegal bioweapon, something beyond the pale even in the context of the resource wars.
FEV wasn't just a weapon, it was. It could rewrite humanity, create super soldiers, mutants, potentially a plague.
Right. The UN was gone, so no formal treaties were technically in place. But the idea of something like the Geneva Conventions, that moral standard against bioweapons, it still existed in principle.
So for China, lending the U.S. was pursuing this weapon, even if it wasn't fully deployable yet.
It was the ultimate escalation. It confirmed their fears that the U.S. wasn't just aiming for conventional victory, but for something far more total, possibly involving non-conventional, species-altering weapons.
It made the U.S. seem like an existential threat, justifying any response.
That's the argument. It reinforced the idea that the U.S. was backing them into a corner with no way out except the most extreme measures. As one commentary put it, even if China technically fired first, the U.S. developing FEV made them more to blame for creating the conditions that made the launch inevitable.
Like bringing a flamethrower to a knife fight. The person who uses it might start the fire, but the person who brought it escalated things to a whole new level.
Exactly. It frames the U.S. as pushing the conflict beyond acceptable limits.
Okay, that covers motive. What about in-game evidence? Physical proof. You mentioned PAM.
PAM, right.
Oh.
The predictor and analytical model supercomputer at the switchboard in Fallout 4. High-level military AI doing threat assessment.
And its logs showed.
Critically, PAM detected multiple incoming missiles over the Atlantic Ocean just before the bombs hit Boston.
The Atlantic. That seems counterintuitive if China's launching from the mainland.
You'd expect Pacific or Arctic trajectories, right? To hit the U.S. West Coast or come over the pole.
So why the Atlantic?
Two main possibilities that still point to China. One, complex ICBM flight paths. They don't always fly straight lines. Orbital mechanics could mean a missile aimed at the East Coast might approach over the Atlantic.
Okay, plausible. What's the second?
Submarines. Nuclear-armed ballistic missile submarines, SSBNs. China almost certainly had them, just like the U.S.
Hiding off the coast.
Exactly. Position a few subs in the Atlantic, maybe near the mid-Atlantic ridge or even closer, and you can launch a devastating short-warning strike against the entire eastern seaboard, New York, D.C., Boston.
And those launches would absolutely appear over the Atlantic to detectors like PAM.
Precisely. It's strong technical evidence pointing away from, say, an accidental launch from a U.S. silo in the Midwest and towards an external naval-based first strike, likely Chinese.
Wow. Okay, so if you just look at this section, developer intent, military desperation, the FEV factor, the PAM data, it really does build a very solid case for China launching first.
It's probably the single most well-supported theory based on the longest-standing evidence. It's coherent, it's logical within the grim reality of 2077.
It's fallout. It's never that simple, is it?
Never. Because even if China pulled the trigger, that doesn't account for the rot within the U.S. system itself, the corporate players waiting in the wings.
Right. We absolutely have to talk about Vault-Tec. This theory is huge in the community. People are just convinced Vault-Tec did it.
And you can see why, can't you? Their sheer mustache-twirling evil in the lore makes them a prime suspect for literally anything bad. Designing vaults as social experiments, of course they'd start the war.
It fits their profile perfectly. But let's trace it back. Where did the idea that Vault-Tec launched the nukes actually come from? Because the original games don't really say that.
It seems to stem primarily from something outside the game canon. A canceled Fallout film script from back in the 90s.
A movie script? Seriously?
Yeah, apparently it had this plot twist where Vault-Tec secretly instigated the war to get their Vault experiment started. That idea, even though the movie never happened and it wasn't game lore, it just sort of leaked into fan consciousness.
And became accepted wisdom for some, like that persistent myth about the bomb in Megaton having a Vault-Tec logo.
Which it doesn't.
Yeah.
We checked. It's a faded U.S. Air Force symbol, but people want Vault-Tec to be the ultimate villain behind it all. The narrative is compelling.
And recent lore, specifically the TV show, while maybe not saying they did launch first, certainly poured gasoline on the fire regarding their intentions.
Oh, absolutely. The show gave us that chilling boardroom scene. Vault-Tec, Robco, Poseidon Energy, West-Tec, the big players, the corporate oligarchy.
And they weren't just planning to survive the war. They were planning to start it, if needed.
Yes. The dialogue, the terminals in the show's universe revealed they were actively worried about peace breaking out. Rumors of talks between the U.S. and China.
Peace would have been catastrophic for Vault-Tec's business model. Their entire product line was based on the imminent threat of nuclear war.
No war, no need for vaults. Their multi-trillion-dollar investment in these underground bunkers, these experimental labs, becomes worthless. The fear-mongering stops paying dividends.
So they actually discussed triggering it themselves.
They framed it, horrifyingly, as a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, to guarantee the vaults would be used, to ensure their corporate vision would shape the post-apocalypse. They needed the bombs to fall to secure their market share, essentially.
Market share of rebuilding America in their own twisted image.
Pretty much. Control the future by destroying the present. It's peak corporate villainy.
And this ties directly into the Enclave, right? They weren't separate entities, really.
Functionally, no. The Enclave was the shadow government, the coalition of powerful corporate leaders, corrupt politicians, and military figures who planned to continue the true American government after the bombs. Vault-Tec was, in many ways, their instrument for ensuring continuity and providing the experimental data they needed.
For things like FEV application or even their eventual off-world ambitions.
Exactly. And the key piece of evidence here is the timing of the Enclave's departure. Sources confirm that key Enclave personnel abandoned their official government and military posts months before the Great War.
How long before?
Some sources suggest as much as 7 months before October 23rd. They retreated to secure locations like the Poseidon oil rig.
7 months. That's not reacting to a surprise attack. That's planned obsolescence of the entire country.
It strongly implies they knew the end was not just possible, but imminent. It's already decided the old world was a lost cause and were getting out while the getting was good. They were waiting for the inevitable collapse they likely helped engineer.
So, regardless of who fired the first missile on the day, the ruling elite had already checked out.
They'd secured their lifeboat, pulled up the ladder, and were just waiting for the ship to sink.
Okay, that makes the corporate conspiracy seem incredibly strong. But there's a counter-argument, isn't there? If Vault-Tec had this master plan, why did things seem so chaotic on the day?
That's the flaw in the Vault-Tec launched first theory. Many argue Vault-Tec profits from the fear of war, the threat of annihilation, not the actual event itself.
The flood insurance analogy. You sell policies based on the risk of floods. A world-ending superflood destroys your customers, your infrastructure, your entire business.
Exactly. Instant global thermonuclear war isn't good for Q4 earnings. It vaporizes your revenue stream. Surviving executives, like Bud Askins in the show, might inherit control, but over what? A radioactive wasteland where pre-war money is worthless.
Their power base, the vaults, were designed for long-term experiments, not immediate global governance.
Right, and we see evidence of surprise on the ground. The Vault-Tec rep in Fallout 4 scrambling to get into Vault 111 at the last second.
He literally says the bombs are dropping sooner than you think.
Sooner than you think implies they had a timeline, a plan, maybe even their own launch date penciled in if peace talks succeeded. But the actual event on October 23rd jumped the gun.
It happened before they expected, before they'd filled their vaults maybe, before their own preparations were fully complete.
That seems plausible. It suggests the actual trigger, likely China's desperate strike, happened faster than Vault-Tec's own nefarious schedule anticipated.
Okay, so this allows for a synthesis, doesn't it? Vault-Tec and the Enclave were absolutely planning for and willing to cause the apocalypse.
But China, driven by military desperation and the FEV threat, beat them to it.
This feels like it respects both Tim Kaine's original statement and the newer lore about corporate evil.
Exactly. It says China fired the first shot, but Vault-Tec and the U.S. power structure had loaded the gun, pointed it, and were just deciding when to pull the trigger themselves. The malice was systemic, even if the final action came from Beijing.
Okay, we've covered the two main intentional culprits. China's desperation, Vault-Tec's greed. But the lore leaves room for other possibilities, right? Ones that lean into the ambiguity.
Definitely. We have to consider the U.S. first strike theory, even if it seems less likely on the surface.
Why less likely again?
Because the U.S. was winning conventionally. Why initiate M&E when you're potentially weeks away from forcing a surrender or total collapse in the enemy? It seems strategically illogical. Unless they opted for a brutal, preemptive knockout punch. Maybe U.S. command feared a long, drawn-out occupation, or maybe they believed faulty intelligence suggesting China was about to launch its own massive strike. A use-'em-or-lose-'em mentality with their nuclear arsenal.
A huge gamble, though. Risking everything.
A massive gamble. The other angle for a U.S.-initiated launch isn't necessarily malice, but capability and accident. The U.S. had nuclear subs off the coast, like the U.S.'s Constitution we see remnants of.
The Yangtze in Fallout 4, right?
Yeah.
The Chinese sub. But the U.S. had them too.
Absolutely. They needed that second strike capability, hidden assets ready to retaliate. But having weapons constantly on high alert, especially with decaying command systems,
Creates the risk of accidental launch. A misread signal, a panic captain, a system glitch.
Exactly. A U.S. submarine commander receives a corrupted message, believes a homeland is already under attack, follows protocol, and launches their missiles, triggering the full exchange. It wouldn't be a deliberate first strike by high command, but the result is the same.
That possibility keeps the U.S. in the suspect pool, even without clear motive for a planned first strike.
It maintains the ambiguity, which leads us nicely into perhaps the most chilling theory of all, because it removes intent entirely.
The theory of simultaneous error.
Yeah. The idea that neither side meant to launch first. That the whole thing was a colossal, tragic accident born of paranoia and failing technology.
The sources mention real-world near misses during the Cold War.
They do. NORAD mistaking geese for bombers, computer errors showing phantom Soviet missile launches. These things actually happened. Now imagine that level of potential error overlaid onto the final days of the resource wars in 2077.
Global tensions at absolute peak. Resources stretched thin. Communication systems probably degrading. Command structures under immense stress.
It's a recipe for disaster. A simultaneous error scenario might look something like this. A sensor glitch on a U.S. satellite briefly indicates multiple launches from China. Maybe it was solar flare activity, maybe a system malfunction.
Standard procedure would be confirm the launch.
Yes, but maybe confirmation systems are down or the data looks convincing enough in the panic. The U.S. launches what it thinks is retaliation.
Meanwhile, in China,
Their systems detect the U.S. launched the actual launch this time. Or perhaps they had their own simultaneous sensor glitch moments before. They launch What they believe is retaliation.
So both sides fire, thinking they're responding to an attack that never actually happened or that they misinterpreted.
Precisely. Everyone acts correctly according to their flawed data and protocols, but the result is global annihilation triggered by basically a technological hiccup and mutual paranoia.
In that scenario, asking who launched first is meaningless. The system failed first.
Exactly. The war becomes an emergent property of a broken, hyper-militarized world system, which is deeply unsettling.
Almost as unsettling as aliens. We have to mention the Zetans, I guess.
Yeah, we do, briefly. It's a persistent fan theory, mostly fueled by the mothership Zeta DLC for Fallout 3 and some cut content. The idea is that the Zetans, who were abducting people and observing Earth, somehow interfered with the launch systems.
Maybe accidentally, maybe intentionally messing with humanity.
Whatever the proposed alien motive, the problem is thematic, isn't it?
Completely. As we said, the core of Fallout is about human choices, human failures, human greed. War never changes because humans don't change.
If aliens push the button, it lets humanity off the hook. It externalizes the blame. It undermines the entire point that we built this nuclear pyre ourselves and then lit the match.
It turns a tragedy about human nature into a sci-fi plot device. So while the Zetans are canon within the universe, blaming them for the Great War feels, well, weak. It misses the point.
Agreed. We stick with human culpability. Whether intentional, accidental, or systemic, the fault lies with us.
So pulling it all together, we've looked at China's desperate situation, Vault-Tec's monstrous plans, the potential for U.S. strikes or system errors.
And it leads back to that core theme. War never changes. The reason the lore often keeps the precise trail ambiguous isn't lazy writing, it's thematic intent.
Right. The point isn't to solve the mystery like a detective novel. It's to show that the entire world system, the US, China, the corporations pulling the strings had become so corrupt, so paranoid, so resource-starved, that the explosion was bound to happen.
Pinning it on one single button push simplifies a complex cascade of failures. If we knew for absolute certain, say, Colonel Zhang pressed the button at 9:47 a.m., then everyone else involved in creating that situation breathes a sigh of relief.
The blame gets localized, but the ambiguity spreads the guilt. Everyone who participated in the resource wars, the FEV development, the corporate power grabs, the nuclear proliferation, they all share responsibility for the outcome.
It forces you, the player, the observer, to contemplate the systemic sickness, not just a single bad actor.
Okay, so based on everything we've analyzed, the developer statements, the in-game evidence like PAM, the FEB context, the Enclave's actions, the Vault-Tec plotting, can we construct a sort of most likely unified theory, the one that synthesizes the strongest pieces?
I think we can. It's not about finding the answer, but the one that best accommodates the most compelling evidence from different sources. Call it the convergence of failure theory.
Okay, lay it out. How does it work?
Step 1. The U.S., through conventional military success, like Anchorage, and the terrifying prospect of FEV deployment, pushed China into an untenable strategic position. Absolute desperation in Beijing.
That sets the stage. China is cornered.
Step 2. China, facing imminent collapse and seeing FEV as an unacceptable escalation, makes the desperate gamble. They launch a first strike, likely using submarine-based missiles to target the U.S. East Coast, explaining the Atlantic detections in PAM. This honors Tim Kaine's original intent and the military logic.
So China pulls the trigger, but that's not the whole story.
No, because Step 3 involves Vault-Tec and the Enclave. They had their own plans to potentially initiate the war, driven by profit and control, especially if peace seemed possible. They had the motive and likely the means.
But China acted first.
China acted first, likely catching Vault-Tec scans slightly off guard, hence the sooner-than-you-think comments and chaos on the ground. Their own meticulous plan for a controlled apocalypse was preempted by the sheer speed of the actual geopolitical collapse.
So they didn't start the 2-hour exchange, but they were ready, willing, and arguably helped create the conditions for it, and then immediately pivoted to capitalize on it.
Exactly. They didn't light the fuse on October 23rd, but they'd spent years soaking the entire world in gasoline and were holding a match, ready to strike it themselves if needed. When China lit their match, Vault-Tec just moved smoothly into the post-fire phase of their plan.
That feels right. It integrates the key pieces of evidence, China's desperation, the PAM data, the FEV trigger, and the undeniable corporate malice and Enclave foreknowledge.
It assigns the action of the first launch to China, driven by U.S. pressure, while assigning the systemic conditions and ultimate intent more broadly. especially implicating the U.S. corporate military complex.
It makes the Great War not just one bad decision, but the culmination of many bad decisions and fundamentally broken systems.
That's the power of the lore's ambiguity. It allows for this multi-layered understanding where blame isn't simple but pervasive. Hashtag outro. So after digging through all this, what's the final takeaway? For me, it's that the lack of a single, universally confirmed answer is actually crucial to Fallout's critique of humanity.
And how so?
If we knew definitively who launched first, we could point the finger. We could say they were the ultimate evil. But because it remains contested, because plausible arguments exist from multiple parties, the guilt remains collective. We're all implicated in building a world where pushing the button was the final logical step.
Yeah, the ambiguity forces introspection rather than simple blame assignment. We've journeyed through developer intent, conflicting game data, corporate conspiracies, even debunked myths. Hopefully you now have a much richer understanding of all the arguments swirling around the Great War's ignition point.
But maybe we should leave you with one last unsettling thought, circling back to the Enclave. We established they likely knew the end was coming months in advance. They retreated to safety, abandoning their government posts, their country, essentially.
7 months prior, while telling everyone else to keep calm and carry on, presumably.
Exactly. So if the ruling oligarchy, the corporate heads, the top brass, the key politicians, knew the world was ending, and their plan was simply to survive and rebuild without everyone else, what does that truly say about the state of America just before the bombs?
It wasn't a functioning nation they were trying to save, it was a resource pool they were managing until they could escape.
Were they leading a country? Or were they just presiding over its controlled demolition? We spent this time asking who launched the first nuke. But maybe the real, more terrifying question is, who decided the world should end first?
And the chilling possibility raised by the Enclave's actions is that they made that decision months earlier and simply waited for the inevitable fireworks to start, triggered by whoever finally cracked under the pressure they helped create.
Think about that level of calculated betrayal. Who needed to launch first when the people in charge had already signed the world's death warrant?